All right, and we are live. Namaste, everyone. Welcome to
வணக்கம்.
today's episode of
Namaste.
Bhakti
வணக்கம்.
Rasa. With me, I'm Shiva, and with me, I have Shreya and Bhuvan. SG Hindu is collaborating with the Hindu Youth Network to bring you today's episode of Feminism and the Power of Goddess Worship. And this is a Navaratri special. Uh, The Hindu Youth Network was established under the Hindu Endowments Board, and they're bringing to you this string of programs which we're proud to be a part of. So, for the next 60 minutes, we are going to bring you a discussion on this topic and a bit about SG Hindu. We are a platform that seeks to be the voice of the local Hindus. So, we are coordinating between 24 temples, 29 Hindu organizations. And if you guys don't know, Hinduism has been in Singapore since the 7th century. So there's a lot of knowledge and information that we can keep track of, and we want to bring to you. Before we begin today's Navaratri special, and before we talk about the goddess, and we are the last religion in the world that really worships the feminine divine, we would like to start off with an invocation, as all endeavors in Hinduism have been. So with that, we'll just begin with 3 ohms and do our Shanti part. So, Sarvamangalamangale Shive Sarvartha Sadike Sharnetram Gauri Narayani Namostute. All right, perfect. So we have invoked all the goddesses, and may Mother Saraswati bless this podcast. So I'm Shiva. I'm the founder of SG Hindu, and I've been active in Hinduism for the last 16 years or so. Luckily, I'm not too old yet. And let me introduce to you our 2 very successful, intelligent, and most importantly, incisive women who will explore goddess worship and feminism with me on this festival of Navaratri. So, Hinduism is the only religion in the world to worship the feminine divine. And we are going to explore a few ideas that are specific to the female ideals, the female archetypes, to the goddess, such as ideals of conservation, empathy, a maternal instinct, which we see sorely lacking in the world today, and sorely lacking, especially in the field of spirituality and religion. And what our purpose today is to talk about some of these issues and to bring it to the light, to make you realize that actually there's something in the history and tradition of Hinduism that is worth looking at, especially with what is happening in the world today with the renaissance of the female divine. So let me introduce to you our speakers today, and I'm personally very lucky to consider them my friends. So first, we have Bhuvan. Bhuvan is an early contributor of SG Hindu, and she's a professional from the healthcare industry. Bhuvan is a avid mindfulness practitioner and psychology enthusiast. Through Hinduism's varied perspective, she seeks with curiosity to understand the world around her. She recently completed her master's in public health and is a certified mindfulness coach. So I know from experience that you definitely do not want to play mind games with her. All right. So a round of applause for Bhuvan, please. Thank you. Woo! All right. Now we'll move on to Shreya. Shreya is the editor at SG Hindu. She's fascinated by the infinite knowledge of Hinduism that comes along with the tradition. She's a listener, an editor, and a communications researcher. She did not want us to tell you this, but she's also a classical instrumentalist, a master's degree holder, and like the 9 forms of the goddess, she does a lot of things that the rest of us struggle to keep up with. So I'm really very, very lucky to have them both on the podcast with me today. So a big round of applause for our female contributors. All right. Before we go into the topic proper, and I know I can be accused of taking up too much time, I just want to say a big shout out to all the Taoist friends we have on SG Hindu Youth Network and in Singapore, who are also celebrating the Nine Emperors Festival. And the interesting thing about this is that the Nine Emperors Festival and Navaratri happen at the same time every year. So this is something worthy to be celebrated, and we hope that from our conversation about Navaratri this year and getting a better understanding of the goddess, the feminine, and the festival, maybe sometime in the future we can have a collaboration with a few Taoists to compare both our festivals, since this is definitely not a coincidence. So, to kick things off, and I'm going to throw both our speakers off the deep end, I want to ask you guys a very tough question. Why do you think God is a woman?
I think that is not just a difficult question, but an essential one. So thanks for asking that. Um, for me personally, when you think about creating life, when you look at the world around you, it's a natural kind of a result for me that the creator is a woman, a goddess. And if you look at what our texts say as well, we talk about Adi Shakti, who's like the eternal, the original source of energy, and she represents life and fertility on earth, and she takes the forms of so many natural things, whether it's the forests or the fields or the rivers. So for me, it's just like a very natural thing that God, a goddess, should be female.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. Actually, for me, I actually feel that God is woman because women are awesome. But kidding. But the point is that it feels like there's the balance of nurturing as well as being incisive, as Shiva said, and being firm and giving that tough love in that sense. So I think for me, it's having this association of goddess as being both, and about how creation requires both. Yeah, and life also requires both, I think.
And it's so interesting because if we think about any tradition on earth, no one talks about Father Nature. Everyone is talking about Mother Nature, Mother Earth, because the father is not even essential to the entire process, right? Uh, Even if you look into the biology of it, there are so many creatures that can just reproduce just with the mother. So the mother, if we want to talk about the primordial source, it has to be the mother, and it has to be that element of it has to be the most important thing. And I think also the other key thing is that nature, like Bhuvan pointed out, she's also very kind and very nice and very bountiful, but she's
Mm.
also very harsh, when it needs to be. When you're stuck in the jungle for army training, no one thinks of Mother Nature as kind, right? um, so I think that's the thing. But okay, if I have to ask you, I'm just going to drill into this question. One thing, if there's one trait that you think God exhibits as a woman, what do you think it will be? One trait. Is it love? Is
I
it the
think I would say
maternal instinct?
patience.
Sorry, Shreya, say that again.
I think I would say patience.
Patience. Very nice. Very nice.
I think I would say giving, because a lot of times I think we depend on that when we go to a temple and we're like desperately asking for like to not fail an exam, for example. Then we are like, oh, okay, you have to give me this, and somehow we like, and things when they end up okay, we realize how giving God is. I would use that
Mhm.
word.
Yeah. And I think generally is our understanding that mothers are a lot more giving and give a lot more than fathers do, right? So, okay, I think you guys have passed that question, the hardest question that I have so far, with flying colors. I told you guys they were very very incisive. So I
Wow.
think one key topic that most people don't realize about Hinduism is we have a lot of stories, right, related to the goddess. We have a lot of stories related to the feminine divine. So, what do you think are some of these stories that we can share with people, or we can share with young girls that you think empowers them as women or as females.
Okay, so for me, I think this might be a story a lot of us heard when we were really young. but it's the story of the Mupperum Devi girl, or basically like Saraswati, Parvati, as well as Mahalakshmi, and they talk about whether wealth is greater or whether you should have courage. Is that the greatest thing you can have, or is education the most important? And the thing that struck with me is that I was also wondering when I first heard the story. As I was listening to the story, I was like, wow, actually, at different points in time, I was convinced that different things were more important. And like, I think knowing at the end that all three traits come together to constitute the strong woman, it was a very powerful message for me, because then I realized that it's not so black and white. Things are not so black and white on how do you survive, or how do you thrive as a successful woman, or as a woman who is considered good, for example. I think this story is quite powerful for young girls, because society has so many messages for all of us from when we are very young on what constitutes a good woman, a woman who's talked highly about, and the kind of woman who's successful as well. So some societies, they make them believe that they need to be very submissive or passive. For example, some societies will make us feel that we need to be a superwoman. We need to be doing a lot of things and successful in different areas and wealthy to a certain extent to be successful. So there are so many things that give us all these pressures. And I think some of these Devi stories, they can really help to bring home the point that actually in life, like we need to have a mixture of qualities, and it's okay if we take our time to really determine what these qualities would like to be and how we would like to be as a person lah. It doesn't have to be like what exactly society says. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Bhuvan. And just to add on to that, I think this point about forming your own identity and not letting people underestimate you, it's kind of reflected in some other stories. Like we have Navaratri coming up, and the story of how goddess Durga was killing Mahishasura, the Asura, over the course of the 9 days. And actually, the story before that is that Mahishasura had demanded immortality, and he wished that he should not be killed by a man or an animal, I believe, but he didn't think about including women. And we see the same kind of pattern with Ravana, I believe,
Mm,
who misbehaved with the woman once and was cursed that his downfall would be because of a woman, but he didn't really take it seriously. So, and we see how both these people are kind of were proven wrong. And um, and talking about what Bhuvan said about the Singapore context as well, earlier this month, I think today in the Today newspaper, there was an article about how the gender gap in Singapore is still very apparent, and how respect for women may still be lacking. And I think these stories help you to reinforce that you have to think for yourself and don't let yourself be defined by society. And it also inspires you to be mindful about giving and receiving respect.
Yeah, and I think Shreya, you mentioned a very nice point about uh, the Durga and Mardini story, which is celebrated for various communities for Navaratri. Is that actually Durga Mai was like a teenage girl in the depiction, and so it's all. I mean, if you imagine like a young 14-year-old, 15-year-old girl coming up to you and threatening you, you will laugh at her, and that's exactly what Mahishasura did. And so I think in our depiction of Durga, we sometimes forget that there was such a disarming trait about her that actually brings about a downfall. And we even see this in the corporate world. Like I don't know if you guys want to chime in on this, but sometimes like the more compassionate, the empathic way, a different way of doing things is a better way of approaching the problem, or having a discussion or building a team than what is considered like the brute force logical way all the time, right? Have you guys experienced that in the working experience that you guys have had?
Yeah, I think you definitely get more done when you're not stuck in, specific roles or some kind of a hierarchy. I
Mm-hmm.
think the collaborative, gentler approach definitely gives me more results personally.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's definitely a good point, because I think when we actually trying to bring out everyone's best, like without kind of putting the pressure on them to um conform to their roles or what's expected of them, whether it's gender or other elements of their identity. I think it then like takes off pressure from you having to perform a role, and you're actually focused on just giving your best and just being. So whether it's from the mindfulness perspective, or I think like, looking at like team dynamics and organizational psychology, I think all of them would say that, being collaborative and harnessing everyone's best would be the best approach. Yeah.
Okay. And I also think that what is very interesting about Navaratri is, through the 9 days, you're seeing a transformation of the goddess, through her life, right? So she starts off at like she's like, the first day is like Shailaputri, where she's like the daughter of the mountain. Then she's her own woman, the Brahmacharini, where she's going to like worship Shiva and go into the mountains and do penance, right? And then we have after that her different forms of Lakshmi, of Durga, so where she takes off a fearsome element as well. And for all our listeners right now, we will actually be doing another podcast with two other very inspiring women on Kali and why she's such a misunderstood character of, even within Hinduism and without Hinduism. Like outside of Hinduism, a lot of people are using or even sometimes misusing Mata Kali for different things and different purposes. So that is a very interesting thing that we can look at. But Bhuvan, going back to the earlier point that you said about the story, I'm actually not very familiar with this story. And so we know that Saraswati is so there's the Trinity, right? So there's
Yeah.
Saraswati ji, who is the consort of Brahma. So for creation, Brahma, you need knowledge. And then for Vishnu, you have Vishnu's consort, who's Lakshmi. And to sustain things, to keep things going, to keep a family going, to keep a company going, you need money coming in, you need resources coming in. And then lastly, for Shiva, is destruction. So you need power to do destruction. I mean, if you want to destroy something, you can't be a weak person with no power and all that sort of thing. So do you could you actually just tell us the story and what this story actually is about?
Yeah, so as far as I understand, and remember from my childhood, like it would be like basically one day I think like a queen kind of has this question posed to her on like how does she need to be ruling, or how does she need to be a successful woman. And I think then there's this person who comes and tells an advisor of sorts, who comes and tells her that like there are different types of strengths out there. And I think different people end up telling the queen that she should either try to be she should try to be wealthy, because that's when people are going to listen to her. And then there are people who tell her that she needs to actually have a lot of education, because with that she can think she's then powerful in that way, because knowledge is power. And then at the end, sorry, wealth, knowledge, and then at the end would be courage, because if you don't have the courage, even if you have the other two, then there's no point, because you can't execute anything. And as a person who's ruling the country, you need to have that executive functioning and powers. So I think when she's told all these different messages, the three different goddesses are also being told. So I think there's this person who slight a troublemaker. So he actually wants to go to them and kind of make each of the goddesses feel like the other two are kind of competing against her, and that basically he's trying to like kind of stir them up and be all like, hey, like my strength is the best. So basically I think it comes to a stage where like all three of them are kind of having involved in this huge fight, and then it's about they are giving a lot of points to kind of rebut one another and to explain why their strength is more important than the other two, and that is the what is the most necessary, and even if the other two didn't exist, it's fine. But I think at the
Okay.
end, if I can't really remember too much, but I think there's some. It comes to a point whereby um, they basically kind of put in these, like they make a guy have all these traits, and then he actually kind of comes together and shows them that only when he has all traits, then he can really really grow, and he can be the most powerful version of himself. So Shreya, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm really very like I can't really remember details, but this is what I understood from it, and this is what I remember and take away from it. Because I remember the most powerful message that stood out to me was that it wasn't necessary to just have one power, even though we might see how people can do really well with just that one characteristic. And as much as we want to always show the world our strengths and we want to be considered strong and amazing, it's also good to have some humility and to accept that we might need to bring in different perspectives. Shreya, please chip in because yeah, this is what I think it was.
No, I think you that was great, and you really showed how these three things have to coexist. And I think the same kind of idea is mirrored in a different way when we talk about Shiva and Shakti together.
Mm,
Like in Tamil, we say Shiva Millayil, Shakti Illai, and
yeah,
Shakti Illayil, Shiva Millay. Like they can't exist without each other. So
mm,
we have this thing happening within the trinity of goddesses, but also in the bigger picture, that this idea of balance and equality for the world to function, which I think is
yeah.
a great point that Hinduism always brings out.
Yeah. And actually like this just brings me to a point where I just think that storytelling is so important for us to all know these different stories because I realized that like in Hinduism like we all know different stories. We all grew up with like certain perspectives being passed to us, which is so amazing. But sometimes like all of these messaging can be more consistent and stories can be passed along in a certain way to empower not just girls or but also like everybody. Just empower every Hindu to know like, hey, this is what my religion is about. This is what I can understand goddess worship as.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're
Yeah,
completely right. I think a
absolutely.
lot in a modern age, we underestimate the value of
Mm,
stories, right?
yeah.
We think that these stories are not important, but and then now they are saying narrative is important, right? And if you think about w- what would we consider the most powerful narratives today, maybe like comic book heroes, but even they are drawing their inspirations from old stories. Wonder Woman is supposed to be an Amazon goddess, right?
Mm,
Thor is an old Greek, Norse god that has been forgotten for
Norse.
500-600 years, right? So these stories actually, I mean, you heard this story when you were young, but it has
mm,
the message has stayed with you. And I think that is something that most women struggle with. When I talk to my female colleagues, there's always this element of balancing, and uh, the kind of Western narrative that we have is that okay, we have to have one thing at the expense of the all the others. But when you mentioned in this story is that the idea of balance. So in your personal lives, do you think that uh, do you how hard is it to do this balancing act, and also uh, being a Hindu woman, what are the kind of uh, inspirations that you draw about being able to balance it, or being able to do all these things of being having the knowledge. You guys are both very well educated, having a successful career, and also having the courage. You are on this platform. We are speaking out about a topic that has not been addressed before, the feminism in Hinduism and Navaratri, how it celebrates it. How do you think you guys balance it, and what are the challenges with balancing it?
Shreya, you
Bhuvan,
want to
would you
go
like to go
first?
first? Okay.
uh,
Okay. So I think one point that always sticks out for me as a great advantage of being Hindu is the accessibility of so many texts. Like we were talking about stories, and the fact that our itihasas are so accessible to us, I think is a major point that helps us balance our perspectives. Like they're available in so many languages. There are TV series and so on. And what this allows is a sense of independent exploration. I think there are several opportunities to think and analyze and explore the ideas that these different texts and stories put forward, and these help to shape your own perspective and help you balance your own things. For example, in the Ramayana, we see how much importance his family, the Raghukulam, gives to sticking to their word. Like once you say something, you have to follow through with it, and that's why Rama left for the forest. But in the Mahabharata, we see how Bhishma's kind of steadfastness about sticking to his oath kind of leads to a downward spiral. And this makes you think, oh, okay, so in some context, you do have to reanalyze. You can't just have like a black and white perspective. You can't say that this is the only way always. And so, yeah, it helps you to not take contemporary societal rules for granted, but to still analyze and explore their relevance. And And like going back to the today's story I was talking about, where they were saying that the gender gap in Singapore is still quite apparent. Um, I think these stories help you to always question those and not um, uh, be subservient to what society necessarily tells you.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. Like the excerpts from Ramayana and Mahabharata. Yeah, actually that reminded me of like how like in Bhagavad Gita, like Krishna brings up that duty, as in the sense of duty, and you just do your duty and you don't have to look at the outcomes. So I think for me, I think what strikes when you said balance and how do we balance it, I firstly don't really think I do it very well. I think I still conform a lot to the pressures of society in terms of like you need to be a superwoman, like if you are doing many things, then wow, like that's amazing. And if maybe you're focusing on one thing, or perhaps you might not really be doing what you're doing in any realm of your life, and maybe that pressure is on you to kind of step up and be just like as competitive as your peers. But I think when I sometimes this is like the truth, but sometimes when I get very stressed, I do think about that what Krishna said actually about you just kind of do your duty and don't like keep fixating on the results, don't obsess about it, because that when that you do that, then you're just building up anxiety for yourself. So I think that kind of there are certain these moments in the idikasams, as Shreya pointed out, and also in terms of knowing like how like the goddess is there, the god is there, like they are there because they are there for us, and it's okay to just be ourselves. So I think a lot of times, even if I'm not balancing it well, it's about kind of the self-soothing and telling myself that it's okay. I think mindfulness definitely helped with this also, but I really think that a lot of these stories and being a Hindu itself just inspires me to sometimes just pause and step back and just think that I'm here for a reason. And if I just keep going on, and even if I can't balance anything, even if I can't really manage things that well, you'll be fine. Like I can get back on track, or it's okay, this is my journey and that is it. So I think it has a lot of calming effects actually. Yeah.
Yeah,
And just
and
to add
and
on to
I
that, I think
sorry,
if sorry, just to add on to that, I think like what Bhuvan was saying about not being
Oh shit. Shreya.
no worries, no worries. So I think one thing, that we've spoken about that, uh, about the role models in Hinduism and how these stories are not
hi,
easy
sorry.
to. No worries. So Shreya, I was just saying that when you spoke about the accessibility of these different stories, right? There are one thing I'm going to accuse you guys of is we are not bringing up the female role models in Hinduism that we can look up to, and these are not maybe very well known because we haven't really pushed the narrative and the stories of these women. So
Yeah.
one of these stories from the Itihasas and Puranas are called the Panchakanyas, the five perfect women of Hinduism, right? And interestingly enough, if we think about both itihasas, the main reason why the conflict happened or the stories happen is driven by the feminine aspect. It's the conflict over Sita, and it's the conflict for Draupadi, right? And when you think about it and you realize that and you take that view, you realize what an empowered position they have. So, in the five Panchakanyas that we have in Hinduism, which are Ahalya, Draupadi, Sita, Kunti, and Tara, Sita, Kunti, Tara, and Mandodari. So, if you think about it, even the wife of the antagonist of Ramayana, the biggest bad guy we have in Hinduism, I mean, Ravana is by far the biggest bad guy we've ever had, right? Um, and his wife is considered one of the perfect women of Hinduism, talks a lot about the struggles these women face and how they manage to deal with it in poise. I think Bhuvan brought up a very nice point about how women are expected to do so many different things. I mean, there's statistics that say that the average woman, if she has a household and she works about 140 hours a week. And that is the amount of hours that a high-paying banker, lawyer, or CEO works, and that is expected of the average woman. So, if we can take inspiration from these five women who actually struggled and saw so much in their life, but still managed to pull through with poise. And there are a lot of conversations within the Mahabharata, within the Ramayana, about they talking about these difficulties. Like, imagine you're Mandodri and you're seeing Ravan do this. He has ruined the kingdom over this lady, right? This random lady he picks up from some forest, right? He ruins the kingdom. All his kids are dead. Like, most women would try to would like just like bail on that situation. Like, the human instinct is to bail, right? But we can see the arguments that Mandodari keeps telling Ravana. One of the stronger philosophical discourses that we've had in the Ramayana between Ravana and Mandodari, and what is the nature of dharma and what she's doing. That's phenomenal to see. And the other thing, these are about the Itihasa characters, but even in the Vedic times, there are women teachers who are very, very highly professed, and they are known as the Brahmavadinis, right? So the Brahmavadinis are teachers like Maitri, Gargi, Ahalya, and Gautami, Sita, etc., who have had very deep philosophical discussions on certain nature of the topic, and they actually spell out a lot of things that we understand as Hindu philosophy today. So we must give credit for that. Even I think in the South Indian tradition, the Tamil traditions of Andal, she's maybe one of the most recent examples of devotion and of a female aspirant becoming a guru, or a goddess like figure, right? So I think with that, Shreya, I think you just wanted to add to something that Bhuvan said earlier about, the balancing act that women have to do.
Oh, I was saying that, yeah, I think Bhuvan is right in saying that women always often face extra pressure from like doing this double duty at work and at home. But if we take the Hindu perspective that Bhuvan put forward, then you don't have to worry about the result. As long as you're satisfied that you're doing your duty, you're putting your best effort in, that is all that matters. You've already done a great job. And I think that is very inspirational.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So now we'll go on to something a bit more controversial in the tail end of our discussion. We've spoken about the societal pressures and expectations. What do you think some of these uh, expectations are of Hindu women? What do you think some misconceptions people have of Hindu women? And how do you think uh, the tradition counters it, or how do you think there are some stories that we see that counter some of these ideas, right? So, I mean, we have the one of courage and Durga, right? A warrior teenage girl killing a mighty asura. So, what do you think, Bhuvan? What do you think some of these misconceptions about the modern Hindu woman are?
Um, I think as you were saying all this, like the example that really comes to mind is I'm thinking about Draupadi, and also relating to how some of the modern um Hindu women misconceptions can be. So people tend to think actually like of Hindu women as someone really really pious and maybe outwardly pious. As in, at least to me, I always feel like you must be doing your prayers very regularly. Must be doing pujas. You must be perhaps dressed in a certain way. Perhaps it's even better sometimes. It's as it might be conceived as even better if you're wearing a potte or bindi. Like basically there are some ideas of the ideal image that a Hindu woman could portray, and also in terms of how she behaves or how she conducts herself, perhaps with the opposite gender as well. So sometimes there can be they are talk about like in gender disparities in terms of how we might look at a man who, for example, has many female friends, and perhaps the same woman in a modern society who has a lot of mates. This reminds me also like of the story of Draupadi and how there are so many misconceptions around Draupadi, and the fact that oh, she has five husbands. And some like actually like there are people some of my non-Hindu friends who have brought this up, and actually they are very curious as to like, hey, like um perhaps is this what is advocated in Hinduism? So as I just want to point out how easy it is to sometimes judge someone based on their external appearance, based on maybe their interactions with other people, and also certain conditions, like for example in this case, how many husbands Draupadi had. So sometimes I think these stories, right, when I actually listen to the stories, as well as when I as I find out more about Hinduism, I realize how important it is to clear these misconceptions. I think the expectations of women are additional in the sense that whereby we always need to prove ourselves. I need to be like, hey, no, that this is not my intention. It wasn't my intention to give off this impression. Actually, I am a good person, and then we try to kind of portray the best ourselves in the best light. But there shouldn't be that additional pressure on us to always have to do that. So I think everyone can be given the benefit of doubt, and there's always a context and a story behind everything that we see. So it's like there's this saying in Tamil about how everything that we see is not true. Everything that we hear is not true, and we need to investigate further to find out the truth. And I think a lot of the Hindu stories help me realize that lah. So I'm glad to actually have this diversity of perspective from Hinduism, not just because yes, there are many gods, there are many stories, but also because there's always this concept of balance which keeps coming up. There's this concept of investigating. There's this concept of trying to really understand what's going on before we judge.
Cool, thanks, Shreya.
Yeah. I think one of the most common ideas that people have, whether it is within the Hindu community or outside, hopefully not as much within, but is that Hindu women are supposed to be servile, subservient,
Mm.
not speaking, not being heard, just doing your duties and being up before the husband wakes up and only going to bed after everything else is done, not eating until everyone is done eating. Um, I'm I guess those stories came from a different era, different perception. But looking at our own itihasas and stories, we can see how different it was and how different it can be and how it should be. Like you were talking about Mandodari having these debates with Ravana. It's not easy to debate with someone like Ravana, and yet she was able to do that. She was able to take a stand and really argue her point of view in such a way that Ravana was willing to engage in that debate as well. And it takes a certain kind of intelligence to be able to put across your points to someone who is already so fixed in your own way of thinking. And that kind of confidence in yourself, I think, is something that we really need to learn from.
Yeah. I mean, that's perfectly right. And I think a lot of times what we are lacking in our discussions about Hinduism and feminism is the confidence, right? I mean, like Bhuvan, you pointed out earlier that Draupadi has five husbands, right? And for some reason, that is not um, ideal for feminism to hold up, right? Yeah, one woman that has five husbands, it's like, whoa, how
Yeah.
does she do that, right? But no one goes like that. That is a feminist ideal that can be held up. Or Kali is a feminist ideal that can be, or Durga is a feminist ideal that can be held up. And a lot of this, why we cannot, why it's not happening is we ourselves are not confident or knowledgeable or have the resources dedicated to this stories to give them a life of their own, right? So this is our podcast, and thank you for voicing out. You guys are taking the first time and voicing this perspective out in Singapore to get these stories voiced out. I think Bhuvan, you brought up another very nice point about the expectations and women having to constantly apologize and constantly make excuses
Prove
and
themselves.
exclusions, prove
Mm.
themselves. And even though this story in the Ramayana is addition, it's a later appendix to the whole Ramayana story, but it's a very telling one where Sita returns to Mother Earth, right? After being the perfect woman for so many years of her life, giving birth to two sons in exile in the jungle, when given the opportunity after proving herself in front of the entire of Ayodhya and come back, she decides she's making a statement for womankind and saying, "I don't need you, and I'm not going to come back." Right.
Yeah.
So it's a story that for some reason still has stayed with the tradition, right? It still has resonated with people and stayed with the tradition, even though it's an addition to the later addition to the Ramayana, and it will bring up so many
And
debates.
I believe she was, yeah,
Sorry, Shreya, go for it.
sorry, I think I broke up.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Now we can. Yeah.
Okay. And talking about Sita going into exile, I believe she was staying with Valmiki, and it's quite telling that he understood the significance of her story and then wrote the Ramayana.
Yeah.
Like even back then, he knew the power that she was carrying.
That's very very true, and if not for her exile, maybe the Ramayana would have never been told. So it's because of her troubles, tribulations, which got told to Valmiki, that the entire Ramayana, which is probably the most Asian story we have, right? It's all over Asia, all the way from Iran. They found depictions of Rama to Indonesia. We are seeing this. We are seeing the Ramayana. So it's because of Sitaji's suffering and exile that this story has come to pass. So very very good point as well. So when you're talking about these misconceptions about outsiders see of Hinduism, you guys have shared the very good point about Draupadi and the five wives. Uh, when people talk about our goddess or see about the goddess, what are they thinking? What are some of the other misconceptions and ideas that seem to be happening in from the outside perspective about Hinduism?
I can't say that this is just pertaining to goddess worship alone, but I think um, there are quite some like misconceptions or questions around like why are there so many gods, why are there so many goddesses, and like what is the purpose of it all. So I think as you were saying the point just now about like Shreya brought up the how the story of um Sita was being told to the world. So I think actually a lot of misconceptions could perhaps be cleared by the kind of good and consistent storytelling that we can have, not just around like specific goddesses, but generally around all of the goddesses, and in general what this symbolizes in our life, about how we have so many different elements of identity and how we can harness our best in each of these aspects. I think that that will definitely help to also clear some of these misunderstandings of goddess worship.
That's an excellent point about education and having this kind of a consistency among ourselves, which comes from ourselves being educated about our own traditions and our gods and goddesses. Um, and I think along those lines, not just the number of gods, but the fact that we have such detailed images of them
Mm,
is a bit perplexing
mm,
to others. And
mm,
so I think the metaphors, the meanings behind these different specific things, traits. I think we need to be very confident in these so that we can answer for them and we can stand up for it and truly explain why it's so vibrant, why it's so colorful, and how old it has to be for all these to develop over the years.
Yeah, Shreya, and you're completely right on that. For example, like one very long-standing misconception has been about Sati in Hinduism, and
mm,
a historian called Meenakshi Jain, who went and started digging into this Sati issue, realized that for all the problems that and misconceptions and the hatred that Sati has generated, do you guys want to guess how many reported and actual documented cases of Sati there have been throughout Hindu history? Give me a number. What do you think?
uh, 40.
So you're saying there have only been 40 cases throughout 5,000 years of Hindu history. Bhuvan, what do you think?
1000.
All right. I was in Bhuvan's camp before this. I thought there must have been like a sati every day. Actually, under British documentation and under when she looked at the legal documentations of sati, there are only 43 cases of
Oh
sati
my
in
gosh.
300 years of British and Mughal rule. So there are only 300 or only 43 times that you've actually seen, and for such hoo-ha about it,
Mm,
it's quite telling about how the misconception and lies, if a lie is told enough number of times, gains a life of its own, right? Um,
mm.
and I
That's
think
such
Shrey,
a damaging thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's crazy.
yeah.
It's crazy.
Like all the like I mean I truly had the perception that it was very very widespread, and I think
Hmm.
like sometimes it can also be like one incident happens and it's being talked about for such a long time, that it
Mm-hmm.
then becomes, it manifests as many incidents. And
Mm-hmm.
when you tell the story to different people, again, it's this whole storytelling concept. How do you exaggerate it and everything? But I'm,
Mm-hmm.
wow, like, truly quite amazed by the discrepancy.
And the other question that I've been asked also is like, hey, why your goddess so scary one? Or there's a lady, a Chinese Christian lady who came to me. She said, oh, she saw a dream about Kali, and she was so
Oh,
afraid and so scared. And I tried to bring her to the temple and tell her like what is the aspect of Kali, and uh, what the maternal instinct means, and when it gets angry, sometimes it's justified. And I don't think I fully convinced her, but this is another uh, aspect that the visualizations of Hinduism are so rich that it shocks people on the outside. But I think that's a good thing as well. One thing that we haven't touched upon is also that women and sexuality, right? And there's a element of there's a saying by Chanakya in the Earth Shastra that there's nothing more powerful than a beautiful woman. And we see in our temples of all these depictions of voluptuous, beautiful sculptures of women, which to other religions almost seem vulgar and like offensive, right? But to us, is a part of life. Even Vishnu uses the beauty of women to trick the asuras during the Samudra Manthan, right? So everything, like Bhuvan mentioned earlier, Shreya mentioned earlier, balance, using your intelligence, finding a right place and the right time for everything is an important characteristic of women. And so how a woman for 9 months gestates a child, the Navaratri is a period for us to be reborn as well. So I think we are right on time, right up on time, guys. And I think we might have we've made a very compelling point for why God is a woman, should be a woman, and will be a woman. And we've also made a very compelling point about why Hinduism is the strongest proponent of women out there. And there's so many stories that you can tap on to uh, bring the idea of femininity out. On a parting note, your last thing that you're going to say on this podcast is, my question to you is, what are you going to tell to the young Bhuvans and young Shreyas out there who are maybe watching this in their teens or 20s? What a piece of advice are you going to give them about being a Hindu woman?
Mm, just like how goddess Durga was able to take her own stand and fight her own battles, don't be afraid to fight your own battles and stand up for what you believe in.
okay. Yeah, actually, mine I think would be similar. So like, I draw upon, as in I wish to like refer everyone to Shakti. So the association of Shakti and energy, and strength. Like, I think all of us have it in us. No matter how we look, no matter how qualified we are, no matter what issues we are going on in life. Maybe some of us look stronger to the world than others, but all of us have the Shakti within us. And I really strongly encourage for all of everybody to just keep finding our own inner Shakti, and not just looking upon other people and admiring them and getting lost in that. Yeah.
That's a very, very nice sharing. And I think that is, Shreya, that is going to be the quote of the podcast. And Bhuvan, I think, drawing to the earlier points about, Mother Earth and patience being a defining factor of, of the goddess and why God should be a woman, we have the story of Savitri. So she's considered an embodiment of perseverance in Hinduism because she is the only person in the history of humankind, mankind, that has brought someone back from death. Right? No one else has been able to do that. So on that note, I would like to wish everyone a happy Navratri, and I'd like to thank the two incarnates of Devi, Shreya, and Bhuvan, who've been so kind to spend this time with me and to speak out about these issues for the last 50 minutes and for the last 1 hour. So we'd like to thank all the users for joining us. And while this is a small step, the littlest we could do for the Hindu community in Singapore in these trying times, we hope that this will be a lot more to come. So namaste and thank you for everyone
Thank you so
joining us.
much.
Thank you.